you didn't know how to code, you didn't even know how to use a computer. Other than maybe to do some basic research online. You got to find other ways to do things and think in non-linear patterns. It can't just be a storytelling. It's got to be coming at it from almost a multi-dimensional perspective. And that's going to continue to change. We don't know what comes after smartphones.
Yeah.
There's always something which comes
Yeah,
next
true.
in terms of technology. So is it going to continue to change? I'm sure it is. We're seeing things like Periscope and Facebook Live being the current incarnation of live reporting. Everyone out there who's got a smartphone can now
Yeah.
report. So how are you going to compete with people out there who can just on the spot take video and put it out there? How do you integrate that into what you cover? How do you provide stuff? It's a very, at one point, scary because you're trying to look at what's coming next and what skills do I need to have as a journalist to keep up with that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's very exciting. What can I do today that's a little bit different? How can I push somebody to, as an editor, what can I do to push a reporter to find something different? How do I tell them to go out and cover a story and make it distinctive and provide the readers there that they want in terms of, interaction, video, comment, social media. It's
You just said something about news and entertainment. So because immersive journalism, we can say that it is a form of providing the news in a form of entertainment. Do you think that really matters? Because isn't more news, don't we as a journalist have a job to focus more on accuracy and truth rather than entertainment?
depends on what you're trying to sell. Maybe entertainment is probably the bad way to put it. I think maybe gamification might be a better, more intelligent strategy behind it. We don't want necessarily, as I said earlier, just push clickbait or stories that don't matter. Verification has to be there, but there's no reason you can't make the facts more interesting without embellishing, without twisting, but present them in a way that's more engaging with the reader. At the end of the day, you have to make sure your facts are accurate, you have to fact check, you have to verify the information. But do you put it out there in 50 lines of text which drones on, or do you put it out there in a method which combines video, pictures, copy, slideshows, interactions, responses from Twitter, all those things? That's more entertaining to me, quite frankly. We use the term loosely, but it's, I'm more engaged by that than I am by just a simple story. And I think most people are. But nowhere in that process should you lose those general basic who, what, why, where, when, and how.
Yes.
Is it accurate? Is it fair? Did it present both sides of the story, or were you slanted to one side or another? Those are basic things journalists can't move away from. You can look around online, other places, a lot of journalists have, and it's causing a lot of contention out there because people are arguing whether or not something is real or not. The fact that we have all these new sources for information out there in the world is going to make people question what they're seeing. So the impetus on us to get it right from the very start is much higher than it's probably been ever before.
Okay, next. Do you think people lack knowledge about immersive journalism or those specific journalism? If so, then why?
You mean reporters or the people in general? Or I mean journalists or the audience?
The audience.
I think, you're familiar with what you grew up with to a certain extent.
So I'm sorry?
You're familiar with what you grew up with to a certain extent.
Okay.
My grandparents would be unfamiliar with immersive journalism as we know it today. To them it was radio and TV. My parents probably weren't listening to a whole lot of radio, they were watching TV, cable news. Not even, not even stuff my grandparents were watching. They were probably watching the local news at 7 o'clock and the national news at 8 o'clock. My generation started to have the internet, so we started picking up on blogs and news and other things like that. But social media as a concept really wasn't developed when I was getting into journalism. So it depends on the demographics of your age group and what they know about interactive people coming up today, I'm probably sure a lot more aware of it because they've been surrounded by that technology for their entire life and have seen it on a regular basis. Not everyone, of course. You always will have education being a factor and knowledge of news being a factor. There are people out there who would never pick up an oil story because they're not interested about the impact of oil on the global economy or on civil strife or anything else going on in the world. But they'll happily pick up something on Kim Kardashian. You know, does that mean they're less involved in interactive media? No, a person who probably follows Kim Kardashian is probably just as focused on interactive media, but from different standpoints. They're probably looking at Instagrams, Twitters, TV shows, something else, while the oil person is probably more interested in online graphics, predictability reports, and various other news which relates to their industry. But it still depends on when you grow up. And I said, bring back the example of my grandparents. What's the oil price? They're probably going to pick up a newspaper or want to do that because that's where they've always gotten the information from. So I think that'll continue.
Okay. So an additional question actually, since we know that we're living in a slightly conservative country and we have laws and constraints to follow when producing content or any other thing. So a subject like immersive journalism, where journalists, they immerse themselves and they don't really follow the law and constraints and they produce a story for the audience. So do you think something like that will replace the current journalism here?
I think it already has to a certain extent, and there are issues regarding that. There are issues where we have gone out and taken video or other types of captured images or something else of people. People have made issues of it because they felt that there was an invasion of their privacy to be in that type of environment or pictures. I think laws need to be established that are a little more specific on how journalists can deal with it, or there's going to be a lot more conflict going forward. In the U.S., rules are very specific regarding libel, slander, and invasion of privacy. That's all because it's been debated and fought over in courts for going on 200 years. So there's rules and standards. That type of journalism is, well, journalism as a profession, I think, is not as advanced in the UAE in terms of legalities around it.
Okay.
And now they're seeing an incredibly fast spike in the adoption of these more advanced forms of interactive journalism. And so they're being asked to handle more and more quickly. And so I think more guidance and more specific rules and guidelines need to be in place so journalists know where those lines are. And in the U.S., when I was reporting on things there, if I saw something come up, I sort of knew where the line was. I knew how far I could go in asking a question or writing a story, pushing it. Here, there's been more than a few times I've been in a gray area. You know, how much trouble is this going to get me in? You know, you're just not sure when you write it what lines there are and what lines you can cross. And I'd sleep a lot better, and I'm sure the senior editors and management would sleep a lot better knowing that I knew what I was doing within a set framework. But at the same time, I don't know at what point you have to manage the cultural mores and standards that are out there with the advent of younger journalism and technology coming up. There's going to be a clash there. I don't know if there's any easy way, even by instituting laws, to make that more acceptable to people. I know young staffers I've had upstairs who do not want their picture online because it's against their, expectations of privacy. Even though they're in journalism, they don't want their picture, to be associated with their Twitter account. So, is there an easy answer to that? I don't think there is. I think there's going to be more issues and more conflicts. And slowly and surely, I'm sure it will adapt and reach some type of equilibrium where people understand what journalists are doing and journalists understand what lines they can and cannot cross. But it's going to take time to get there.
Okay. Next, I would also like to ask you that immersive journalists are considered unethical due to certain reasons, for instance, their language. Is this unethical behavior justified because they immerse themselves for truth and accuracy?
What do you mean by their language?
For instance, if you want me to name the publication, like for instance, Vice or AG Plus, there are some young journalists who are known for immersive journalism, and they don't have a way to speak as we speak ethically, and we know what words to use and what words not to use. But when it comes to immersive journalists, they don't really follow that.
I'm not going to agree with that statement entirely. I think there is a difference in how you come off and how you can appear, whether it be on camera or video or some other environment, which is going to apply to a certain group and another group is going to be offended by it. I don't think that's really ever a change. I can sit on air and I can drop F-bombs and I can do all kinds of other statements which may appear inappropriate to a certain audience, and it certainly will. Other audiences won't bat an eye at it and they'll be very familiar with it. Ultimately, I think you're coming down to not just cultural differences, but even social differences between categories. People have the ability to choose their own media channels out there. I may like Vice and I may not want New York Times. I think this is not me talking, I'm just saying in theory. I may look at the New York Times and go, too stiff, too stodgy, don't want it. I may want to go somewhere else. I may want to go to a small private blogger who's got videos of things which most people are going, oh, that's inappropriate. As long as they're not illegal, why is it an issue? If you don't want it, don't watch it. There are plenty of other things out there for you to be involved in. I think this is not just here, this is everywhere globally. There are some people who simply need to not try to tell me how I should do certain things because they don't like what I'm doing. There are certain laws to protect people, and I'm not suggesting anyone break any laws or violate anything, But when it gets to the point of we're not talking about safety or we're not talking about other issues, how I come off and how I speak and how I interact may be more of a reflection of who I am in my community than it is necessarily anything else. And because someone else doesn't like that doesn't mean necessarily that it's wrong.
Okay, so do you think journalists should or shouldn't follow ethics?
Well, I think journalists should follow ethics, but what I'm hearing isn't an ethical question. It is an appearance question. Some people will say it's unethical if you use the type of language. I disagree. Is there a law which states otherwise?
True.
So, don't get me wrong, the problem with ethics is, yes, we should adhere to ethics very clearly, but you move from area to area, market to market, ethics are going to vary. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, I have a law degree, so I'm very focused on what can I legally do. And I also have to pair that up with the fact of what is going to maybe drive my audience away or hurt my credibility online. If I'm working for a newspaper and I get up there and start talking in a manner which is inappropriate for a general audience and I alienate them, I've done myself no good and I've put myself out of business probably. So you need to be aware of more than just whether or not someone thinks it's ethical, but whether or not you're actually engaging with an audience who appreciates what you're doing.
Okay.
Does that make a little more sense of where I'm coming from?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally, it's my last question. I would like to ask you to give us a few advantages and disadvantages of immersive journalism.
Well, the advantages are you can interact with your audience in ways you never dreamed of before, and they can give you impact on ways to make your stories better than you never considered. You're sitting there and here's what happened, and people respond, well, what about this? What about that? Can you show me this? Yes, I can show you that. Here's the answer to your question. That's a better story.